this is relevant because Greta has been a long-standing and sterling member of both organisations over many years. So it's great to have the participation of of poets and historians, and that is not irrelevant because of the theme of the book, which is about history and literature. Which
Mm-hmm.
is one of my great interests, is the interconnections between history and literary awareness and creativity. So I think it's could open up a good discussion. So Greta, as many people know, has been writing poetry and prose fiction, and also contributing to the poetry volumes produced by London Voices and the publications of the Socialist History Society newsletter over many years. She contributed to our publication on 1917 Russian Revolution, on women poets and their reactions to the revolution, which was a few years ago. We're also hoping soon to bring out another publication in that series on writers and politics in the 20th century, where Greta has contributed her articles on Anna Seegers and Carlo Levi, two novelists and creative writers important on the left in the 20th century. So, anyway, let me just talk a bit about the book. And this is Greta's second novel, which follows on from the first one, which is more of a family saga based on family histories of life in Germany in the mid 20th century during the turmoil of the interwar years, rise of fascism, etc. That was called Under Charred Skies. This one is totally different, but it still focuses on one of Greta's abiding themes, which is the role and power and role of women in society and their relationship with the wider society, which is a theme that's been running through lots of socialist thinkers throughout the
Mm-hmm.
early period of the socialist movement. We can think of Engels writing about the role of women in the family, August Bebel, Clara Zetkin, Kalontai. And in the English tradition, the socialist George Bernard Shaw is not often recognised as a great writer on women, because if everyone knows his plays, women take a central role in most of his plays, and great roles for actresses. Uh, and obviously, Shaw was a socialist as well as a claimed to be a feminist of a very eccentric kind, you might add. Sylvia Pankhurst, another leading socialist communist of the British tradition. Uh, Ancient history, which is the theme of the book, is has also concerned Marxist and feminist historians and classical scholars from at least the 19th century, late 19th century, early 20th century. I can mention here Jane Harrison, who was writing at the turn of the century before the First World War. Important books are Themis, a study of the social origins of Greek religion, and Ancient Art and Ritual, which were both published in 1910-11, I believe. Also, I know Greta has been influenced by George Thompson, who was one of the
Mm-hmm.
original Marxist historians, classical scholar, who diverged from communist theory quite a bit later on. He became a bit of a Maoist, and but in his formative period as a scholar, he produced some very important books. Marxism and Poetry is a very interesting one from 1945. Aeschylus and Athens, the first philosophers, and the prehistoric Aegean. This is not irrelevant to the theme of Greta's book, which is called The Defeat of Gilgamesh, which is based on the Mesopotamian mythology of the hero Gilgamesh, which has been influenced. It's important in Sumerian and Babylonian civilizations. I only found out yesterday that the Babylonians invented soap, so they're a great culture in that respect. Just imagine what life would be without soap. Uh, I think that's very important. Gilgamesh, the story of Gilgamesh had influence on the Odyssey, on the Iliad, even in the Bible, because there's this themes about the flood. So let's hand over now to Greta, who will describe inspiration for writing the book and read a few passages and describe the themes in which it contains. So I'll hand over now to Greta, and we'll take Q&A and comments after the formal session.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you for the introduction, and lovely to see many people join me for my Zoom book launch. Unfortunately, Zoom, the book came out in April, exactly when Corona shut everything down. So there was no more live performances. So I'm very glad I can do a book launch of Socialist History Society and London Voices Poetry. So I will read a text about Mesopotamia in general and the position of women in particular. And I shall then read one short passage from my book. Mesopotamia, I have to do the slides, hopefully, yeah. Mesopotamia was the name of the land between the rivers Euphrates and Tigris. It is modern-day Iraq and Syria. Settlements began around 6000 BC. By 3000 BC, irrigation was invented and led to the first civilization on Earth. Horticulture and canal building led to the first ever cities. What follows is an astonishing record of achievements such as the invention of the plow, the wheel, writing, mathematics, astronomy, and architecture. Richard Miles, archaeologist and historian, says civilizations are built on farming, irrigation, cooperation among strangers, and a redistributive economy. Richard Miles calls Uruk the mother of all cities, with a population of 50,000 at the height of its growth. The Epic of Gilgamesh is set in this town. The land was fertile from the flooding rivers, but also had salt marshes and deserts. Miles shows in his film a dug-out vessel from the Ubaid period around 3200 BC. There were thousands of them. He thinks they may have been the equivalent of a pay packet when filled with harvested barley or wheat. Sir Lyonel Wool, archaeologist, worked on excavations on the mounds called Ziggurat Hill near Ur in the 1920s. Agatha Christie was often there accompanying her husband Max Mallowan, the archaeologist. They discovered cuneiform tablets in their 100,000s. Some of them contained the story of the flood, written thousands of years before the Bible, the news of an earlier culture, producing our familiar Bible story, led to a media storm, especially among religious leaders at the time. Layer and layer upon mud bricks houses were dug up, as well as a vase factory and further down a burial site, a pit 64 feet deep. Woolley called it the Royal Cemetery. It contained an elaborate funeral with many people, animals and artifacts, jewellery, and Queen Shub-ad's headdress. City life led to industries, crafts and trade, and many specialists, such as builders, scribes, brewers, merchants, dancers, fortune tellers, and soldiers. Hierarchies and the class society developed. Many cities were built along the rivers. Each existed as an independent city-state with their own gods and goddesses. Henri Frankfurt, a Dutch archaeologist, wrote about the Sumer people's spirituality and beliefs. The Sumerians were the original inhabitants of the region near the Persian Gulf. He explained that early humans saw themselves entirely as part of nature. The chaos they perceived around themselves led them to speculate about life and death as we do. Why are there bad harvests? Why are there floods? They developed creation myths which gave them meaning for the natural world. The stories of their gods and goddesses were as real to them as the water in their rivers. Like many other Neolithic cultures, polytheism came long before monotheism. Over time, myths formed compacted histories told and retold many times over the thousands of years and changing according to the powers in charge. The goddesses and gods were as real as people to them. They were washed, dressed, watered, and fed at rituals, especially for the harvest festival. Each goddess represented a particular aspect of nature: a river, a tree, an animal, a mountain. Even salt and grain were gods who could be approached and spoken to. I will send thee to my angry god, my angry goddess, a person would say when sending flour to appease the god. The power of the belief system was all-encompassing. What a goddess pronounced could not but be true. Each person could also decide on a personal god or goddess and have a small artifact of them in their home. The difference between a god and a person shrank among those who were in charge of city life, which included the elders. The god notion ensured that power was consolidated in each city-state. Such flexibility meant that a good ruler could also become a god or goddess. For instance, the city of Lagash was run by god Igalema, whose son, daughter, wife, and relatives had subsidiary roles. Zainab Barani, archaeologist and art historian, comments, the king had become divine and his authority was now supreme. The goddess Nanshe, who lived in another town, was often asked for advice on solving problems, as she could read the signs of the stars. Gilgamesh, the famous hero of the epic story, was half man, half god. The goddess of writing was Nidaba. She was also the goddess of reeds, who made the reed sing from the shepherd's pipe. The invention of writing on cuneiform tablets with a reed stylus was born. Recording became necessary when civilization became more complex with many more people living together, and records needed to be kept of grain harvests and livestock. The position of women. Thousands of years of gathering roots and plants and exercising horticultural activity shaped human minds and bodies when in the 4th millennium a proto-literate period emerged. It is now thought that it originated from the sowing, reaping, and harvesting of grain, scribing, and baking bread, activities mainly done by women. It led to a growing population. Further, these activities led to women to invent other activities like making clay pots, decorating them, dyeing wool, and weaving cloth. Among the many gods and goddesses, Inanna, goddess of love and battle, was the most famous of all goddesses. The Inanna cult endured for over 4,000 years. She was also goddess of priestesses, animals, and plants. The entrance to her sheepfold was the entrance to the womb from which all life emerged. All life was considered sacred. Priestesses are often called prostitutes in some texts, but Reni says this is a misnomer. In Mesopotamia, sex and love were one and the same thing. It was celebrated, and so there were women. Their power over procreation, their sexual allure and physical beauty were pervasive. This is Inanna in her battle dress. The sexual act with its ecstasy was considered the nearest experience to the state of bliss in the divine existence of the goddesses. Priestesses and men who visited them brought divinity to both through their virginal state, seen as the state of enduring creativity rather than a bodily state. The sacred marriage was a spiritual event of great importance. Inanna performed the act of copulation with the shepherd Dumuri, her lover. It was a powerful way of celebrating fertility. It was also an act of eroticism. Mesopotamian art is unusual in that women's bodies are presented nude and confronting the viewer with no embarrassment or shame. Reni comments that a sense of sin or shame was absent in Mesopotamian art and culture. Spiritual festivals like the Harvest Festival and the Sacred Marriage were bonding experiences for the citizens of a town. They shared and participated in a cosmic event. It allowed them to feel a strong sense of belonging and spiritual unity. Women and men tended to live in family settings and had small holdings. All produce of wheat and barley was brought to be registered, recorded on cuneiform tablets and stored in communal storehouses. The temple was the center of life in the city. Brewing, baking, and scribing took place in the temple, which was run by priestesses. The high priestess of Uruk at the time of my book was called Sen. She translated the wishes and expressions of the goddess Inanna for the citizens. Priestesses could perform the sacred marriage instead of the goddess. The love poem by the priestess Enheduanna, daughter of Sargon, illustrate this effect. Enheduanna is said to have been the first recorded poet in history. She is famous for her temple hymns to Inanna. That's one image. And another image of Enheduanna. A well-known code of law created by Hammurabi in 1700 BC is considered as documenting the cutting back of women's rights. In historical writing, the work and lives of women remain largely hidden, says Judith Herron, professor of antiquity. Historians hardly ever write anything but the history of men, says Jean Bottero. So we'll be looking at key aspects of rights for women should include the following. Are women visible in outdoor spaces? Can and do women own property? Do women play a significant role in the spiritual worldview? Do they possess social status and political decision-making power? We already heard of Enheduanna, who had a high status position in the country. Bottero and Burani describe further powerful women. Queen Semiramis, here in the 17th century painting by Guido Reni, also called Samuramat, is said to have lived around the year 800 BC, or the years 800 BC. According to Herodot, she was one of the powerful women who reigned over large parts of Asia. When her husband died, she had him buried in the palace of the kings. She ordered a large terrace mound raised on his tomb, 1.5 kilometers high and at least the same in length. It is still visible today. It is argued that she then arranged to have many towns built. One of them was Babylon. Architects were invited from all over the world. She had 2 million laborers to build the city, the temple, and a wall equipped with 259 towers and so broad that 2 chariots could move along it side by side. After completing Babylon, she traveled with her army to Persia and Egypt, conquering land and building cities. Another woman is Queen Shub-ad and the women of Mari. We know them due to the many letters on cuneiform tablets that can still be read. They ran large estates while their husbands were fighting in battles. Shub-ad was a fervent letter writer, so were many other women. Cuneiform tablets found in Mari brought to light how about women's lives and the time. Shub-ad reigned over a large area of land with a temple or harem. Records detail how much oil each woman received for toileting and for lighting. Some 250 women, royal family members, servants, dancers, singers, cooks, and bakers all lived in the palace. Barani points out that the earliest and best documented Sumerian women's administrations is one of the first comprehensive archives of any kind in Mesopotamia. 1,600 clay tablets detail the rulers of Lagash in the early dynastic period. The Sumerian name is Ebau, or women's, not eBay, Ebau, of women's household. 3 queens are recorded by name: Dimitur, Barantamara, and Shasha. The Ebau, or goddess Bau institution, was an important economic setup with a workforce of 1,500 dependents. The economic structure included a large agricultural area, fieldwork, canal maintenance, animal husbandry, fishing, and a weaving mill. Income and food rations were recorded. The Ur dynasty during this time was very powerful, with an extensive royal family. The livestock center was nearby in Nippur, where Queen Shulgi-Simti reigned. Women were recorded as owners of mills, textile business, and dealings in metals. They could buy and sell their property. They had diplomatic relations with women from other cities. Non-elite women are attested. They were part of the agricultural workforce and in weaving, pottery, and other craft work. At the time of 3000 BC, we can assume that women in the city-states had all the expected powers. They are visible in the artworks. They play an important role as priestesses in the heart of each city, the temple. They own property which they can pass on, and they have power to make political decisions. Over time, the Mesopotamian society became more often a battleground, leading to the rights of women being reduced. As the society changes, the new rulers adapt old myths to their new power structure and a male-dominated belief system. Thank you. I'm now going to read a short section from the book. I'm going to have a drink of water. Okay, this section is called Time of Departure. The early morning sun threw sharp rays into the narrow paths between the houses, where they bid everyone farewell. A huge hug from Nin and well wishes from many of the local craftspeople set them on their path. The landscape was dry and yellow with the heat of it. Sandstorms and floods had long gone, and everywhere was parched. It was good for the path because it was well trodden and hard as rock. The juniper bushes and acacia shrubs left and right had few leaves left. Goats and sheep would have eaten anything that looked green. Days went by pleasantly and in good company. As they walked, they found that more and more of the landscape was taken up by orchards and plantations. They sensed in approaching the big town of the Sumer, Uruk. It had made history for hundreds of years and had not lost its visionary inspiration for men and women. Uruk with its stories, Uruk with its large irrigated fields, its orchards and vast grazing areas for the animals. The walls were built well before Inanna's travels. It was found to help deter nomads just wandering in and pleasing themselves with stolen goods from unaware citizens. They were built good and strong with city gates which started to show the ziggurat shape of future decades. Was it not Aga, who should have been the hero of the city after his father Mebaragesi had died? But, unaware how history tells the story of the victors, he had handed the privilege to Gilgamesh, who was but a pompous youth, pushed into celebrity role by his ambitious mother. How did the women of Uruk feel? According to Nin, there was much unease, although some women found Gilgamesh irresistible and sided with him. That is women for you. They keep struggling between power in their own right and the defilement of giving in. The travelers were looking forward to what were called the finest examples of temple architecture in the land of Sumer. The Pillar Temple included a platform and courtyard with thousands of cone mosaics covering the walls, leading to a portico with 8 massive columns in 2 rows and corresponding half columns on the adjacent wall. These giants, nearly 6 feet in diameter, were constructed of fired segmental bricks encased in cone mosaic. They were looking forward to catching sight of such inspiring architecture. One could only wonder at the expenditure of labor, raw materials, technical and administrative skills, and brilliant new inventions. They were excited to see the small, busy streets with their workshop houses made of mud brick, the narrow alleyways, and the crooked thoroughfares through which the shepherds had to bring their herds, or the farmers who had to bring their wares to the markets. And what markets they were! They had heard the most tantalizing stories of goods for sale, silks from China, precious stones from India and Afghanistan, carpets from Persia, the stone and pottery wares ornamented with luxurious paintings, the jewellery fit for a queen or a goddess, the metal workers who had such mysterious skills of mixing ores and using rare and exotic materials to create their wares, from toilet articles, copper vessels, to figurines and weapons. The carpenters and basket makers all had their own quarters in the city, so that each craft community had their lanes where you could hear the tap of hammers, the dust from masons, or the glow of the metal workers' furnaces. Traders obviously also had their community life and assisted in the success of the craftspeople through their imports of wood, stone, metals, and many other goods. They stayed close to the river, which was flowing languidly at this time of the year, its whispering reeds near it, and the birds, the warblers, storks, ducks, and many more keeping the human company with their songs. Every night, Ninata and Inanna went swimming and consciously trained their bodies to greater strength. Life was easy with so much help. The cook prepared meals for them, and the shepherd and peasants set up the campsite with mats and cloths under the starry sky. Beer was served and they drank it from straws. By the fireside, they spontaneously broke into song and listened to the owls hooting in the vicinity. They could hear and smell wild animals from time to time approaching the group, but were quickly noticed and shooed away. More stories emerged. Pasak, old and frail, was a fountain of them. Her eagle eyes were deep and soft like a clear night sky, and her deep voice so melodious that her story sounded like a song. Once upon a time, there was a very beautiful woman called Pandora. She was one of the daughters of Demeter, who in turn was the daughter of Gaia, goddess of Mother Earth. She was bequeathed with great gracefulness, joy, passion, and the art of song. She could tame wild animals, and with her singing, when she raised her voice into tunes, the birds came from all the four corners of the earth and joined her in a concert. She was a creature of the wild earth that slept among tall grasses like the gazelles and roamed along with herds of beasts, being able to speak their languages. When she started singing, no one could not fall in love with her. Human men followed her in trance. She deduced them and moved on. Here's a love song to her caressing skills. She let fall her scarf and revealed her body so that he could enjoy her. Boldly she kissed him on the mouth and threw off her garments. And then she stretched out on top of him and she showed him this savage what a woman can do. The women laughed and cried with pleasure at such beautiful language, and Pasa continued her story. Every morning she washed in a spring and cleansed herself to achieve a virginal state. Each man thought she was only his, and his hope rocketed sky high for eternal love, only to become disappointed and mortally wounded in his pride. But she remained carefree, and she did not give it up for anything or anybody. When she sang, creatures that had fallen ill or had broken limbs would crawl to be near her, as her singing raised their hope for well-being and an eternal life. Earth creatures, though, knew that eternity was theirs only through oneness with the universe. They were content, but human men thought to achieve it for each on their own. This vain hope, once nurtured, became a menace to them, leading to wars and destruction. Pandora, though, is still free and out there with the animals, and although we can't meet her in person, she's with us, giving us pride and joy. The small group had inched themselves closer and closer to Pasak, not to miss any of her words. They looked deep into her unfathomable eyes to find the wisdom in them that made her speech speak such wonderful tales. The men were lost in thought, realizing how things could go wrong so easily. The fire had turned to a red glow, and everyone stole away to lie down and dream of Pasak's words. Finished. Okay, David.
Thank you, Greta, for that excellent presentation, covering lots of different topics and the reading. I noticed that some of it's quite graphic. It wouldn't be adapted for Jackanory if that still exists. I mean, if anyone knows what that is, but if they're as old as me, they will.
It's not meant for Jackanory.
We do have. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not in vision, am I? We do have time for comments, question and answers, and if anyone wants to make a point or raise a point, please do so, and I will call you. I can't see any hands up at the moment. Let me start it off. What?
Yeah, there's a hand up, Jane. Yeah.
Where is she? Can you see that?
Yeah, I can see a hand up.
Let me have a look.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes.
Darling, that was absolutely wonderful, mesmerizing. I want you to tell me stories all day long. And I want to make clay goddesses. I'm really inspired. I haven't read the book yet, but the cover's fantastic. And I'm really looking forward to reading it now.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Okay, darling. Okay.
Greta? Greta, can you hold up a copy of the book? Because many people won't have seen it. Can you describe the cover? Where did it come from? Because I know, but I don't think everyone knows where it came from.
The cover is a painting by my granddaughter, Jasmine Sykes, and she has studied art and art history at Manchester University finished last year, and this is one of her early paintings. She does digital art as well. You can see her on the internet.
Yeah, it's very good.
Yeah.
So can I ask you a question? What gave you the first inspiration to write this book and research? How did you research it?
Yeah, that's a good question, because in a way, the story of writing this book starts in 2006, although I wasn't working on it then. And really, my inspirational point was an exhibition at the Royal Academy about Byzantium. Now, you may think, what's that got to do with it? But the exhibition in the Royal Academy was, I was bowled over, and I'd never seen anything like it, because it told the story of powerful women then. And since then, I read Judith Herron's book, The Surprising Life of a Medieval uh, nation, not ever, empire. And Judith Herron has gone out of her way to also look for women between the lines, where these women were, what they were doing. And she's, if you look up Judith Herron, she more or less, she's doing similar work to me. So I've been reading all her books about Byzantium, but of course before Byzantium there were other times, and in a way I moved backwards in time, if you think about it. And then I read George Thompson, and George Thompson's book on ancient Greece, not classical Greece. And I've got loads of books on classical Greece versus ancient Greece. And Robert Graves, for instance, a very good example. Robert Graves talks about ancient Greece, where, in a way, women, of course, had a lot more power in ancient Greece, and so they had in all the older society. And George Thompson looks at the old times, the whole Mediterranean basin, actually, and he analyzes the way language has changed, because he can read Greek, ancient Greek and Latin and so on, and he analyzes and uses the actual language to find out where the words came from. So, for instance, the omphales, the old words, the Delphi oracle and so on, they originally mean womb. You know, a lot of these words are Delphi as the meaning of womb. So a lot of words have an older meaning before a new meaning was put on top of them in classical Greek times. We all know that classical Greek times meant women were shut up in the house. Aristotle, Plato, Ovid, all of the people were extremely misogynist, and they rewrote history. So obviously I had to go back further and further with George Thompson's help, with Judith Herron's help, and I ended up in Mesopotamia without really, really knowing much about it. And so it's a long story from 2006, which gradually, after I'd done the other book was only published in 16, I think, the German book. But by that time, I was already moving back in history, and came to Mesopotamia. And there, the archaeologist and historian Zainab Barani, who is a professor at an American university, she's done a lot of work on looking at the way women are portrayed in Western culture and also in the ancient culture, comparing. And she's very, very eloquent. Really marvelous book to read. And so it's been a long journey, very interesting journey. I spent a lot of time in Warburg Institute in Woburn Square and in Senate House. And I've been just using those libraries, are marvelous. If you don't know Warburg Institute, A.B. Warburg is a man who was from a banker's family in Hamburg. They had to flee during the Nazi period. The brother, luckily had a rich banker, family member in America, and they helped to bring the books. They had to bring all the books. He had a huge library of books on anthropology, art history, psychology and so on, in French, English, Italian, German. He had a vast collection, and he was a sort of amateur anthropologist and archaeologist maybe, and he looked at cultures in South America who are snake admirers and so on, have a different, a whole different way of looking at the importance of women. And his library was moved with the help of his brother, and it was received. A London University in London, it was prepared to accept the library, and it was brought into where the Warburg Institute is now. And the interesting story is, and a few years back, the university said we can't keep these books anymore separate because it's really special library with their own system of recording the books. And they said, oh, we can't afford this anymore. And there was a bit of a court case, and the Warburg Institute found the documents that said, yes, this was a lifetime giving this place. And so the Warburg Institute is still there. Marvelous.
Okay.
Long story. Sorry, very long story.
Well, it was interesting. Can I ask, you had a lot of illustrations there of the goddesses and the women that you spoke about. Now, obviously, we don't know the who created those, but can we not be sure that most of them, because you said these are images of powerful women, which they were, and they didn't reflect the modern view how women were seen in Christian culture. That women who were shamed and feared. But we can more or less be sure that these were. Can we not? That these were made by men? No. Would you say these were made by men, or were women artists creating these? There's no way of knowing, is there?
I think that's, again, is interesting but it's an interesting question, which I don't think we can answer. I've seen little bits on that, but Zena Barani would be the first one to know. But a lot, as you know, the ancient art often doesn't have a name to it.
Authorship is a modern phenomenon.
Exactly. That's one point. And then there's another very interesting book by somebody called Mirab, and he can also read cuneiform tablets, and he has criticized very much the sort of modern day interpretation of Mesopotamia from a modern day perspective. And he found out that a lot of the names, they are literally the names of the women goddesses or women female kings and male kings. They're the same. They're not like ours where you call John or Jane. They are very similar. Shimti or Shantu can be a man or a woman. And so very often you can't tell if that person is a man or woman unless you then have an artifact. Because we have all the pictures I showed you. These are actual pictures of women. There are many more female pictures and female nude images, artifacts and images of women than of men in Mesopotamia, surprisingly. But who made them? My guess is men and women had craft workshops, and it would have been men and women, but we don't know.
Okay, thank you. Has anyone got a question? I'm Mireille Ryan. Do I bring her in?
Pardon? Also, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Yes. I was wondering because
the sound's a bit low. I don't know if it's. Greta here. Greta, can you hear that?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay, good. No, I was just wondering because I imagine with regard to weaving that it must have been women in the home who were the first weavers. And I think Elizabeth Barber would maintain that. But I wonder also, because I have seen some images of women potters. So perhaps women were also potters. But what it really interests me is to know, was it with the rise of the cities that men started to take over power and for things to become more professionalized? Do you think that it was at that time and the goddesses became less important? I don't know if anybody's really written about that, exactly what happened, but something must have happened.
I think, again, it's an interesting question. gradually, of course, I think it's that the men went to war is basically in the whole Mediterranean basin. You can see, I mean, take the Etruscans and so on. I mean, there's lots of stories of men going off to war. The Amazon story and Troy, Achilles and so on, fighting Penthesilea and so on. They're all stories of women doing their own thing because the men have gone off fighting all the time. So as obviously the competition between city-states. So Egypt is different from Mesopotamia in that Egypt was a monarchy with one power, but Mesopotamia had actual city-states, and they all had their own life. And the marvelous stories of how they communicate with each other, where the women also, and men, of course, who rule, they write letters to somebody else and say, oh, you have so-and-so, can I have that, and can we, and so on. Lots and lots of communication going on, loads of writing, thousands of tablets that haven't been deciphered. So I think we're still trying to find out where the point came, but I think maybe the best answer I can give at this moment is we have to think in terms of long centuries and thousands of years. So say if there was a sort of high point around 3000, but by that time the city-states were powerful. They were trading and there was people coming, nomads from the north and so on, and there was fighting and they had to fight. And of course, as the power of the man with weapons, as the whole weapons thing came in, and the weapons thing, that's Richard Miles says, that it comes via hunting. You hunt and you learn to use weapons and so on. And as the hunting got more and more, there obviously the power of these heroes from the battles then became more powerful, more worshipped. And the interesting thing is that a number of people who I read have said that the Code of Hammurabi, which is very famous, and you see it, I think, in the British Museum, what it describes is, it does describe rights of women, but they're already much reduced and people recognize that they're much reduced. So obviously, logically, they were more before. And they gradually, because of the warfare and the weapons and so on, and of course there were then huge battles with various tribes, the power of the men became bigger and bigger. And so I think we need, if we look at it in terms of, that is over a long time, over a long period of time, 1,000 years, nothing very quickly.
Okay. I've got a few more hands, blue hands here. Sarah, I'll call now.
Thank you.
Do you want to? Does Mary want to do a follow up, or
No,
is that happy?
no.
Are you happy?
I just wanted to say that makes sense, and I guess that male power has obviously lasted for a long time, and it's only now that we're, it's beginning to change, and that we can look back and learn more about women, from that time. It's taken a long time, hasn't it?
Yeah, it takes me a long.
I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Thank you. Mind you, 2,000 years is not that long. If they went on for 3,000-4,000 years, a long time. So.
Okay. I'll bring Sarah in now. Where is
Hello.
she?
Can you hear me?
Hello. Hello.
Oh, I missed the beginning. I'm so sorry. I couldn't get through on my tablet. I don't know what was wrong. So I'm on my little phone. So I suddenly realized that might work. The last person kind of asked my question because I was wondering more about when the women's rights started to disappear, but actually thinking about what you've just said, and I've got Wikipedia up, I've been reading a bit about the wars and the laws. Greta, can you tell us a bit what you think about the way lives changed in the city-states for women? And I'm just trying to imagine why it was that with the sort of prevalence of war, and it seemed to be like a huge, massive part of the culture, what was going on at home? Why were the women losing power?
Well, that's obviously a very, very big question, but I would say their power, of course, was for a long time amazing and very strong. But if you imagine over time that men, because they fought, the cities fought against each other, had to defend themselves, they had to build up the walls. Some of these cities, they were built again and again and again. It's absolutely amazing. The temples were built 20 times. They never let it die down. It was built again and again. And of course, the women, basically, because the women, why the temples were the heart of each city. The women held the power there. Everything took place, the brewing, the baking. It was the center of writing. They had houses where all the grain was stored, the surplus grain. So every family got grain to take home with, and grain was stored for selling, buying and selling goods and so on. I would say it's difficult for me to say how they lost power, but obviously power gradually waned away as over the thousands of years, over the men coming back with trophies and with powerful fighters. They became heroes, the men became heroes, and somehow maybe women didn't have the right way to defend themselves against this rising power. And so actually George Thompson has the very best way of showing how very gradually, because he describes it, of course, for ancient Greece, and the way when first, I mean, you may have heard the word matrilocation and matrilinearity. So that means in the early times, all the rights, men didn't know they had something to do with, procreation. So before the family, and so and even when they did, matrilocation means the men move in with the woman's family, and the woman's family runs this whole estate. So if you think of it, we have it the other way around. We take on women, or at least used to, in Europe, take on the name of the man, and he's sort of become the pater familias. He is the one who runs things. But in matrilocation and matrilinearity, it's the women who run everything. And many African societies have been like that before colonialism and so on. So matrilocation, matrilinearity, that was the power of the women. When that gradually goes, because I suppose through the little families living together, and then men going off to war and so on, the power of men will gradually go up. And also you can see how power of women who say, as first is the mother to the daughter, and gradually as the rights go from mother to daughter to son to, and so on, it moves over towards the men. So we have to imagine it as a very slow, gradual process.
Yeah. Can I comment on that quickly?
Yeah, go on.
Thanks, Greta. That's really good. I remember once you telling me about the men come back from war, they need to know if that child the woman is carrying is theirs. So that sort of makes sense to me. But also I was thinking, when you were talking just now about the women in the temples and the kind of communality of the way they were living there, sharing things and sharing out, being responsible for feeding the community. What I just read was that they found abandoned villages during excavations, which suggest violence. So one thing that might be a factor was that women had to be defended if there was, violent men around, which kind of took them out of the kind of community operations and into the private home. I wonder if you think that might have been a factor.
Well, it could be probably many factors.
Fascinating. Well done, darling. Brilliant.
Thank you.
There's another hand up, but I've got 3 Gretas here. I don't know if you've been close.
I think Prue had her hand up earlier.
Oh, there's 3 people called Greta, and one's got the hand up. Is that someone else?
I had my hand up. but
Yeah.
it was the same question about the
Yeah, go on.
power, so it's okay.
Carry on. Yeah, carry on.
Me too?
Well, yeah, why not?
No,
Take
no,
the floor.
I'm saying that really my question's been answered because
Oh, it's been answered.
about
Okay.
the rise of male power. Yeah,
Right.
you
What
could tell
about
us whether Engels was all wrong or all right, but I can see it threaded through. It's really interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Okay, lovely. What about Asma Anbari? Where is she? Got another hand up here.
I have a question, David.
You Asma Anbari?
Asma. No, I'm Asma.
Okay, you go, and then the next one. Asma can come on next. Go on, carry on. Yeah, carry on.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Greta. I enjoyed that very much. I'm particularly interested in the sort of intersection of historical and fictional literature, and I was wondering if you noticed, whether you could approach certain issues in a way that traditional historiography might not be able to do.
Yeah, I think that's marvelous. I love that question. I mean, a little bit like David, I do think that approaching history through a literary source, it does open up so much of a broader avenue into the life of the people. Because I do think in historical writing we've got very stuck into dates and names of battles and all these type of decisions, but there is so much content. There are so many. There are children, there are women, there are households, there are markets. There's so much there that if I think through a literature approach, bringing in literature. This is some fantastic writing. I've read about the Queen of the Desert, for instance, marvelous Gertrude Bell. If anybody has heard from about that book, marvelous writing that is very, very exact on the history of it, but it also gives a whole portrayal of the life. I mean, that is a biography. I mean, in comparison, I would say my book is, of course, is part fiction, because I'm telling a story as if Inanna had, I mean, I'm assuming, this is my assumption, that the goddess Inanna, who was like the goddess, that she was the experience of an actual person. And I think we know that people have different personalities and people have different characteristics and abilities and so on. And some people are just very good leaders and they can do things well. And so maybe this woman, Inanna, was marvelous and became an example, and people raised her as a god. And that, this happened in Egypt as well. Women became gods because they thought she was marvelous. And so the story, to take a story, I mean, I've tried to be very exact with the knowledge that I gained from reading about Mesopotamia, because I'm very impressed with what happened there. And of course, we had the exhibition in the British Museum, which was quite fantastic. And the Iraqis are endeavoring to try and find all the artifacts again. A lot of them have been stolen due to the war. So there is loads of stuff that still needs doing. So it's important to bring the history of that country to our attention, but wrap it up in something that is a little bit entertaining to read. And if you want to be entertaining to read, you have to put some adventures in and love stories and so on. I hope I've answered your question.
Okay. Yeah. Can we move on to Asma? Where is she? Do I have to?
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi. So I'm Asma Al-Anbari, and I'm Iraqi. And I'm very grateful to you, Greta, for this very stimulating chat. So thank you for that. I'm a painter, and I currently am working on contemporary depictions of Ishtar and Lamassouse. So what you're saying is quite a valuable inspiration. My question to you is regarding the title and why you chose The Defeat of Gilgamesh.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, I've had sort of doubts about it. I mean, I don't think defeat is really a very good title, to be honest. But I did choose it because I wanted to bring attention to Gilgamesh. If you just write a book and it hasn't got names in that none of us know in this Western world, then it may not raise much attention. So I think I wanted to bring in the name of Gilgamesh and fit it in with all the other people who've written books with Gilgamesh, with a huge number of authors who've used Gilgamesh already. And it had to be defeat, because it is a marvelous story, but a lot of people I've talked to in this work, I'm in the LK, in the London Centre for Near East, and talked to people there, and some of them said, oh, he's a horrible man. He's been a horrible man. So there are different views on it. A lot of people obviously think Gilgamesh is wonderful. The legend, the epic is glorious, but he's not a nice person. And he's also, people compare him to Werther, but he had to be unsuccessful for my story. And so the defeat of Gilgamesh is the name, for better or worse.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to make a comment? I don't think I've got any more hands raised.
Yes, me.
Francis.
Okay.
Was it?
Me.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Noggy, Barrow.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, yes, I can. Very faint. Yes, carry on.
Well, I'll try and be loud.
Scream.
It seems to me, oh, by the way, I'm your German, except that I'm a sort of Anglo-German. I'm in Bremen. Anyway, I'm sitting on my stairs and wondering like hell what impressions you have from your sources about their views of the past, because you mentioned that the men go out hunting, and that makes that is part of the rise of male power. On the other hand, we know more and more during the last few decades, at least, that hunter-gatherer societies are and probably always were extremely various. So, what version of the Mesopotamian pre-Uruk past comes through, if at all, via any of your sources?
A lot of things have been written about hunter-gatherers, and usually in all the accounts, the early people, Neolithic people, are called hunter-gatherers. But I believe the sources I've been reading recently, and that includes the New Scientist, there is a move to see, and also Richard Miles, for instance, there's a greater move to separate hunter-gatherers into horticulturalists, gatherers, and then hunters as a separate version. So I think it's it's a subject that is still extremely wide open to scientific research, and different people take different lines on it. And I have chosen to, I think that one of the latest reasonings are that there are different tendencies, they're different strands, where the horticulture type activity, whether of course women would do the gathering of roots, as everybody accepts that, and men would go out hunting. But the women didn't just gather roots. They saw the seeds, they used seeds, they planted them, they actually started horticulture activity. Those are some of the more recent writings I have seen. And I can only say, everybody's trying to understand what happened in Neolithic times, and none of us have like the final answer to it. I'm sure there's lots more that is going to be found out.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else? Or shall we start to sum up?
David, we have a question here.
Carry on then. Go ahead. Gil.
What is it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello,
Hello.
Hello,
it's Jill.
it's Jill.
Jill, rather the worse for wear, but I can remember when Greta first brought up the question of Gilgamesh, I hear you say, that I had come across it before Greta, because I had reviewed a ballet for the Morning Star issue and found that Gilgamesh was somebody that I had never heard of, like an awful lot of people. But this was back in, well, the 50s probably. And that I had read an account of him, and he was shocking. And that is really what Greta really came up with. Because I thought, how can they write a great big saga about Gilgamesh and find he was that sort of character? So I was also a bit shocked about it. But I would say that in Aboriginal society, they also have this phenomenon. And was it, yes, they were hunter-gatherers, much nearer to our own times. And I've made a big study of the Aboriginals too. So we began to fit in with our ideas of hunter-gatherers before that. So well, I think I might leave the question there because I've joined my various thoughts and studies together, and I'm sure all of you have. So I don't really have any more links in particular to make with the whole story. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Lovely
Thank
to
you,
see
Jill.